TV.
This is Morning at NTV, and many thanks for staying with us. My name is Romeo Busiku. Our next conversation is going to be centered around sexuality education in Uganda and how schools are going to be rolling out the sexuality education framework, even though it's not being, it's absent as it is. It was supposed to be rolled out, the guidelines were supposed to be rolled out in 2018. But right up to now, we do not have a sexuality education framework, and that's why we have an expert this morning. Let me give you a brief preamble. Sexuality education was supposed to kick off in schools as soon as sexuality framework to guide implementation was launched by the First Lady Janet Museveni in May of 2019. But a year, 2018. But a year later, the implementation hangs in balance as several groups, including the church, criticize it as inappropriate. According to the framework, for instance, children in pre-primary should be learning to follow instructions and knowing themselves, whereby in the section of anatomy, learners are taught the difference between boys and girls. Now, amidst all the disagreements, we have someone whose organization has piloted some of these trainings to positive effect, and that is Mr. Charles Owekmeno, the programs coordinator at Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Alliance Uganda. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good to meet you, Romeo.
Now, sexuality.
Good morning, viewers.
Good morning. A sexuality education framework guideline was supposed to be rolled out in 2018. Am I right? Around May.
Exactly.
But a couple of years later, the guidelines haven't been rolled out for implementation. Senior one students have already made touchdown in their schools. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a big miss for the country. The Ministry of Education did a very incredible job to work with the different stakeholders and make sure that we have a national sexuality education framework for in-school young people. And it was launched by the First Lady in May 2018, but the implementation has lagged because of a number of factors. One is that we needed to work on the implementation framework, which Ministry of Education has done so. The second one is that a section of the leaders have expressed some concerns around a component of the framework. And that has made the entire implementation delay. And it's a big miss for the country because we're having young people in school. This week we have had the senior ones report to school, and they are going to miss out on this opportunity of being taught appropriate information and in a very systematic way regarding their sexuality. So this is really a very critical issue for the country, and we need to urgently prioritize and make sure that it's rolled out in all the schools across the country.
What are some of the components leading to the slow implementation of this sexuality education framework?
Well, one of the main concern has been around the young people, the young people, especially the minors who are around 3 to 5 years, and some section of our leaders, especially the religious leaders, feel that those young people do not need such information. But I can say that in the framework, such young people have targeted message that is really around their growth, them understanding being who they are and being a girl. It's not really the other sexuality education around body changes. Those ones are for the age which is in the adolescent stage. So the way the framework was structured actually catered for that, but still they were concerned that those are very young minors and they don't need to be introduced to that information at that age. So Ministry of Education has been engaging them. The First Lady herself has been at the forefront of this to make sure that they understand and appreciate so that we can progress. We can move and roll out the framework in school.
And some experts contend that the National Education Sexuality Program, this sexuality education framework, will not actually solve the issue, the main issue of sexual violence, but only target the symptoms. What do you make of that?
Well, the biggest gap that we have right now is appropriate information for young people at the right time. And that's what the National Sexuality Framework intends to address. That in a very systematic way, the young people while they're in school are taught the right information, they understand their sexuality, and that actually has a very big impact in terms of even addressing sexual violence, because they will be able to detect the risk they will be able to perceive the risk when they have the right information. What is happening now is that most of the young people, even when they're engaging into risky sexual activities, risky behavior, what they now see is the consequence. When you ask them, did you know, for example, if you engage in this risky sexual activity, you will get STI, you will get HIV, you will get unintended pregnancy. They don't know. And that's why we need to prioritize to give them the appropriate information. And then we can complement that with other intervention that strengthen. But the foundation is about a child growing up while having the right information regarding their sexuality. And that's what we are emphasizing.
And how can these schools prioritize addressing the needs of the sexual and reproductive health needs of their students? How can they prioritize addressing the sexual and reproductive health needs of their students?
Well, the schools, actually, this is something that they can integrate and institutionalize
Even
within
in the
their
absence
program.
of the guidelines.
Yes, like for example, the schools we are working with in the Eastern region, the schools in Bujiri, in Iganga, in Mayuge, what they're doing is that they have created sessions for young people, and they have been trained. They have trained teachers. Our partners have trained them. So they are able to have at least in a week 30-minute session with the students on their sexuality, and students are all they are enrolled into the sessions, and they can go through a number of sessions so that they have appropriate information. And when those ones graduate, they enroll another 30 and they are assigned to another teacher. So what the schools can do, one is that make sure that sexuality education sessions are integrated into your program. Create time for it. Two, when you're planning, you know that, for example, you have the girls in your school. Like now the senior ones have reported. Most of those girls are at the adolescent stage. We know that they have needs for their menstrual health. The schools must make sure that they have facilities for menstrual health. They have emergency menstrual health facilities within the schools so that in case they are in need, they are able to take care, because that creates an environment. But secondly, the schools have to make sure that amongst their teachers, they have those experts who can deliver sexuality education to the students whenever they need, and also can provide counseling. Otherwise, if you don't create that environment, and then where will the young people go? They will be making a number of wrong choices and decisions because they are not guided and they don't have the right information.
There have been also some cultural resistances to this new sexuality education framework. What do you make of that? How has it affected the whole rollout?
I think for the cultural
and the spiritual aspect, the cultural and spiritual aspect.
For the cultural aspect, we have actually been engaging them. First of all, sexuality education. There is no culture in Uganda that did not have sexuality education. And by the way, it's different from the sex education that are delivered by Senga. All the cultural settings in the country were having mechanism to pass information regarding sexuality to their young ones. So they have understood and appreciated that this is just that we want it now to be structured and institutionalized. There's nothing different. Even some of the aspects that people are resisting, you cannot resist it if you don't have a structured way of delivering the information that you agree to. For example, if we have agreed on a national sexuality framework, can we have it roll out with the components that we have agreed on, and then we can begin to discuss others. But just because we have issues with one component or a small component of the framework, then we stay the entire framework. Do we know the effect of this to the country? Do we understand the risk of having our young people pass through adolescence without appropriate information? It's too big. And by the way, I want to share with us that this morning, as we speak this morning, many young people have dropped out of school because of these sexual reproductive health issues. And it's a big cost to the country. If we look at this country 20 years to come, and the report we have now is that we're having 25% of young people, especially young girls, getting teenage pregnancy, and most of them drop out of school. So do we understand the loss of this the cost of this to the country.
If they do understand the cost of this whole process to the country, then why are the spiritual leaders, especially the church and other religious leaders, so adamant to accept this new sexuality framework, because they've termed it as inappropriate?
Well, for me, one of the most important things that I would like to share with our viewers this morning, in sexuality education, context is important. And in Uganda, we know that we have a number of contexts. We have religious contexts. And there are things that some religious institutions would not want to teach within their setting. And that's okay, because they also have to maintain their value. But my question is, what can they teach within their context? That's what is important. And that has to be done. Instead of saying that because for us we don't want this component of sexuality education, so it should not be there. That one is not appropriate, and it's really a big loss to this country when we take such decisions. So for the cultural institutions and for the religious institution, what you need to consider is look through the framework that has developed and see what component that you can deliver within your context, and make sure that it's done and it's mainstream. That will be a good contribution from you, and then the other context will handle the other component that is not appropriate for you. But we shouldn't be throwing blames at each other, but instead focus on what we can deliver within our context.
Now, the traditional and the spiritual tradition and cultural leaders are so against this because, one, they feel like this whole sexuality education framework is premised on the teachings that have already been in the societal realm already. The sexuality education framework is focusing on abstinence teaching. Premarital abstinence, do not have sex before marriage, this and that, masturbation is not good for you. This is what has been in the societal realm for many, many decades, and they believe you're just formally putting these values in the national policy and rolling it out as a national program, but it has already been in existence for the longest time. That's why you have the traditional leaders saying, this new framework is teaching students to know their roles in society, which has already been taught in society. And when it comes to sexuality abstinence, the people in churches have been doing that. So they feel like no additions have been made to the sexuality education framework. And that's why it has taken long to be rolled out.
That's really, okay, some people hold that view, but in my opinion, I think we need to be informed by what is happening in the country. I can share with you a few key data that we have. For example, the average sexual debut age is about 15 years. Secondly, we're having 25% teenage pregnancy in the country. Right now, from Uganda AIDS Commission, one of the highest rate of new infections for HIV is happening among young people, among adolescents and young people. And that clearly indicates that most of our young people are getting sexually active. And when that is happening, we have to make sure that they have the right information to make the right choices. And we also have to make sure that services are there. Because if we don't do that, then what is happening? We are going to have them risk their life. And we are seeing all the implications. But the second and most important thing that we need to think about is that the society is transforming. For example, I can ask, what proportion of our young people are online right now as we are talking? What kind of information are they accessing online? And us as a country, our responsibility is to make sure that they get appropriate information so that when they are exposed to other form of information, they are able to make decision that this is the right, this is, because I always give this example that when your daughter is being tempted into risky activities, into risky behavior, you as a parent, you will not be there. What will be there with them is the kind of information that they have. And that's how significant sexuality education is to the young people. Because then, if they get a wrong information, they will be able to say, this is wrong. And they take the right decision, and they will go for the abstinence that you're recommending. Or if they are already sexually active, they will know what choices they have to make to keep themselves safe. But if you don't, if we deny them the information, then whatever they find out there on the internet or through their friends is what will inform their decision making. And in most cases I must say, their decisions are risky decisions, and we are seeing the results all over the country.
And indeed, Indocha Primary School in Bujiri district achieved 0 pregnancy and 0 dropout after they adhered to the National Sexuality Education Framework. They actually invented their own sexuality framework to actually teach the teaching staff and the non-teaching staff, so that when they get into a position where they need to advise a student, they have all the information they need. So if it's working for Indocha Primary School in Bujiri district, why are we seeing resistance in these other schools?
And I think that's exactly the lessons that we want to share this morning, because through our partner Straight Talk Foundation and Reach a Hand, we're working in about 100 schools in Busoga region. And these schools have integrated sexuality education. Currently, we are using, actually, it's not our own framework. We're using the PSA framework that was developed by the government of Uganda. But what the schools have done, we are using the whole school approach. They have integrated the sexuality education within their programs. We have engaged their support staff, because you don't know who a young person will open up to. They can open up to the security guard, they can open up to the cook regarding their sexuality. So what the whole school approach does is that all the key stakeholders around schools are actually engaged, including the parents, including the school administrators, and they create supportive environment for the young people to access the information. And where we have done this over the last 2 years, we are getting great strides. We are getting improving performance. We are getting dropout completely reduced. Some of the schools are registering 0 teenage pregnancy because the young people are empowered, and also the entire school environment is supporting them. So this morning, we are calling upon every school institutions that we have. The secondary and primary schools, please prioritize sexual reproductive health needs of your young people. Make sure that the girls in your schools have access to the menstrual health facilities. Make sure that you have sessions. We are still having debate around the curriculum, but let's make sure that there are some sessions where the young people have the right information that they are getting through the school. And let it be institutionalized. It shouldn't be just something that is happening, small sensitization. Let it be institutionalized, and the young people are taught proper sessions, and they understand their sexuality very well.
And of course, Mr. Wakeman, we are talking about integrating the sexuality education framework into syllabuses so that all students can access this information. But according to the new O-level curriculum, none of this was inculcated into that new curriculum. What does that mean for the students?
Well, there's a component of it that is included, but also what the schools can still do, because there's a lot of time that have been given after lessons. That is the time that the schools can also creatively use to have a 30-minute session, at least every week.
Like after 5?
Yeah, even if it's not, because the lessons are stopping at around 2 in the new curriculum, if it's fully rolled out. And then the afternoon is for extra curriculum, skill building activities. And that's when also we can integrate sessions on sexuality education. You see, one of the things that we must appreciate as a country, and I always give this example whenever I'm meeting parents, whenever your children are going back to school, you are telling them very good thing about using pocket money very well, concentrating on academic. But do you know what will bring them back home? Pregnancy. The next thing, they are sick. What have they done? Unsafe abortion. The reason to that, and you are all stressed about all this, and as I'm speaking now, I know many parents are really in stress over this, and they are experiencing this. But the reason is simple. You are choosing schools because of their academic performance. But you should also make sure that this school has mechanism and program to give appropriate information on sexuality to the young people. Because when young people are in adolescence, the reality hits. They have feelings, they are beginning to relate with each other, but when they're doing this, do they have the right information? That is the missing gap in our academic program. And for that reason, I would call upon this nation, as we prioritize other important things, let's make sure that sexuality education is integrated within our school. Let it be a priority. There are countries like Zambia that have even moved towards making it examinable to make sure that the young people get it. And they have mainstreamed it in all aspects where the young people are being brought up. And it's institutionalized. And what are we seeing for Zambia and Ghana? Improved even economic indicators for the countries. Like Ghana is now one of the fastest growing economies. And when we visited them recently, for them they have appreciated sexuality education and rolled it out in school. Much as they still have discussion around sensitive issues like we have in the country, but they have taken a step. And that's what we need to do as a country.
Indeed. And in the 90s, during my days in primary, our teachers only smuggled the sexuality education framework illegally into the curriculum. They even told us, do not mention this to your parents that we are teaching you sexuality education, because they might not take it lightly. So in my regard, in my opinion, we started sexuality education illegally because it wasn't a national framework. It was upon the teachers who realized these students need this kind of education and this kind of knowledge so that they are in the know and they avoid early pregnancies. Because I'm telling you, in the 90s, there was something different happening. Children as young as 14 were having sex. By the age of 18, a young girl was having like 2 children. So there was so many issues to do with lack of sexuality education, and the onus was on the teachers back then because they were so patriotic. They were like, what can we do even in the absence of government in that regard? But then the other issue was the parents. Now, in this new age, the parents are not willing to have that conversation on sexuality education, and the teachers who used to be okay with it right now in this new age are also saying, this is not our duty. This is the duty of the parent to actually take on the mantle of teaching their children sexuality education. In your opinion, is it the onus, is the onus on the teacher or the parent to teach sexuality education? And what should the parents know in that regard?
Yes, Romeo. Just to start with, you know, sexuality education is one of the most, for lack of a better word, sensitive issues because of 2 things. One is that people fear to talk about it. Whenever you talk about sexuality issues, you see some people just closing their eyes.
The doors of the class and the windows have to be closed before that.
Yeah, they really, and despite the reality being really bare there on ground. The second issue is there has been a lot of misconceptions. Many people still think that sexuality education is the same as sex education, but that's not true. Sexuality education is different, completely different from sex education. Sexuality education focuses on this young person understanding who they are, having life skills to take the right decisions regarding their sexuality, having the right information about the sexual reproductive health needs that they have, and be able to plan for them, and be able to take the right decision, being able to understand changes that happen in their body and what each one of them means. For example, if you start menstruating, you should be able to know that when you engage in risky sexual activities, you will get pregnant. So sexuality education provides all that, but also focus on your future, who you are and who do you want to grow into. So it's a big empowerment model. So many people tend to misunderstand it. And it's far from that. It's different from sex education. Now, there has been a big question in this country. Who should deliver sexuality education? Is it the parents? Is it the teachers? And everyone is running away from the responsibility. Now, for me, my simple guidance to all of us is that whoever is bringing up a child, whether it's a parent or it's a school setting, must ensure that sexuality education is integrated. And here is my view. One, right now, about 80% of our adolescents and young people are in school. And when they are in school, the school is taking the biggest proportion of their time. So there is responsibility on the school that while they are there, they get access to the right information on their sexuality. But secondly, parents, and this is what I've been telling parents whenever I meet them, that it's also your responsibility to make sure that your child that's why I'm telling you that when you're taking your child to school, you should bother to ask whether the school has program on sexuality education for the children. Because you are sending your adolescent there, and if they don't have access to the information, what's going to happen next? She'll come back with pregnancy, and you will be all crying. And then secondly, if it is within the home setting, if you feel that you yourself is not best positioned to deliver the information, then you can seek professional person, you can seek peers who are well trained, who can deliver the sessions to the young person. But as a parent, you should be so much concerned to have your daughter and son pass through adolescence without appropriate information. And in most cases, for most parents, they will not finish their adolescence without having a problem. Yeah, and some of the problems are either sexually transmitted diseases, teenage pregnancy, or you find that the child has been eloped and they are married at that young age.
We've seen that so many times. Families coming out, my daughter was kidnapped, only to find out that she got married to some older guy in some other district.
Exactly.
But then back in the day, you did mention something about sexuality education and how it empowers a student or a learner to know more about themselves, how they are changing, the adolescence and all that. But wasn't that inculcated already in the syllabus? I remember studying this in the reproduction topic in primary 4, reproduction. Yes. Don't you think that what is inculcated in this new syllabus, in this new framework, education framework, is just something from the past? You're just getting something from the past and just inculcating into something new just to make it a national policy. Because experts contend this abstinence-only approach is not working. Let me first get it from you. Is this new educational sexuality educational framework, the proposed one, is it only abstinence-centered?
No, it's not only abstinence.
Is it an abstinence-only approach?
No, it looks at, and that's why it's a more holistic approach. But also, just to share with you, I noted right from the beginning of these discussions that sexuality has been there for some time.
Yeah, it has been there.
The only thing that we're doing now is mainly two things. One is to structure it so that it's institutionalized or it's in a framework setting. Secondly, is we are also cognizant of emerging issues because the society are changing.
Yeah,
for example, I was giving you an example that one of them is that young people are spending a lot of time online, and online they are having access to a lot of information on sexuality. They're having access to information on sexual orientation, information on sexual vices like masturbation. They have all those information are there, and some of them are going ahead to practice them. You get it? So if as a country we don't put up appropriate framework to give them that information so that they can be able to make their choices, is where we find problems.
But the contention from the experts is that this information has already been in the societal realm for the longest time, and they believe that instead of focusing on this abstinence-only approach and just teaching the students how to know when their bodies are changing, we should actually take another approach, like educating them on contraception. What can they do when they find themselves in a risky situation? Because if you told them that it's only abstinence, a child won't know that, hey, to protect myself, I might need a condom, leading to unintended pregnancies and unsafe abortions in that regard, because they do not have the information. They were told you only have to abstain.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we're trying to do with the framework. Where if a young person is already within the adolescent age, the information is different. You're talking about abstinence, but you also have to talk about other safe-sex options. The other thing is that the model that we use, the other model was for academic, you're passing exam, but this one is more of an empowerment model. It looks beyond just passing, but for you to understand also the reality and how you can practice and even make choices like you're saying. For example, if you find yourself at a risk, sometimes not even intended, assuming a young person is sexually abused, what options do they know that they can take to protect themselves? For example, can they go for PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis? Do they know that? Can they take maybe after pills that can prevent unintended pregnancy?
That's not being taught to them.
Yeah. So now the framework for young people who are of age, those who are in adolescence, now opens up to try to share with them all that information. For the young persons who are still of lower age, the framework provides for information that is a little bit controlled, because you don't want to expose them to so much information at that age. But the issue is that progressively, this young person will begin to have access to proper information. And with time, what we are going to see is that they are able to make their own choices. And by the way, there are many countries that have even prioritized this as core education before a child even goes for starts the actual academic.
Indeed.
Because by that time, they are already empowered and they're able to make their choices. So the question here that you're talking about, the difference between the current approach to sexuality education and what was happening is that, one, what we're talking about is structured, and secondly, its use is more of empowerment approach. So the young person is the one who is empowered to be able to make, because initially we used to think that parents will make decisions for you, will make choices, but with the kind of information and the environment our young people are growing now, most of their decisions they are taking on their own. So our empowerment model helps them to be able to make the right choices.
Understood, Mr. Awekmeno. So what needs to be done in the interim to roll out the guidelines of the sexuality education framework to arrest this situation?
I have 3 calls that I want to make this morning. The first one, and I want to start it with the concern that we have. As a nation, we should know that every minute that is passing by without sexuality education for young people, it's a great loss to this country, because we continue losing them, we continue having them drop out of school. So we must prioritize and see that there's a big added value to this country when we have each and every young person growing up pass through sexuality education. There's a big added value, and that's what we have to agree to. Secondly, what we have to do for the institutions, if you run any institution, whether it's religious, whether it's school, where young people are passing through that school and you're bringing them up, know that they have sexual reproductive health needs and they must be prioritized. Because if they don't, then you will see the effects that we are talking about. My last call, and second last call, is to the parents. The parents, please make sure that your young people go through sexuality education. Don't allow your daughters and sons to pass through adolescence without appropriate information. And lastly is to government. For me, the government needs to see that in the next 20 years, what kind of young people are we going to have that will grow into adults? If they are dropping out for teenage pregnancy and they're having these high rates of HIV infection, what kind of young people shall we have? And for that reason, we have to prioritize and have quick action. We shouldn't take years to roll out some of these
Mr. Awekmeno, as we wrap up, you as the Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Alliance, in a minute, what do you pledge to do to arrest this situation?
First, we pledge to work with all the key stakeholders, especially the schools. Our partners, Straight Talk Foundation, Reach a Hand, are there to work with you. You can reach out to us and we can link you up to those partners.
Indeed.
Secondly, for the country, we are also available to work with you. The Ministry of Health, we have already been working together, especially the Adolescent Health Unit. We have been working together. Ministry of Education, Ministry of Gender. Let's work together and prioritize this so that we can be able to have sexuality education rolled out to young people wherever they are. That's
Programs Coordinator at Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Alliance, Mr. Charles Awekmeno, many thanks for having made the time to speak to us. It's been really, really a pleasure having you and talking about this discussion. It's really imperative that the nation gets educated on this issue.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Right about now, I'd like to link to my reporter, Stephen Mbide, who is at Namirembe Cathedral, just like you can see him right there on the video wall. Very good morning once again, Mr. Stephen Mbide. What's going on at Namirembe Cathedral?